Welcome to part 6 of Securing the Republic. Now we're going to talk about the Monroe Doctrine. Now, with the end of the Napoleonic Wars by 1815 and the end of the War of 1812, the same time period, you're going to have an American continent, America continents, that is ripe for independent movements. And this is really going to be reflected by the time we have James Monroe's presidency, but you see it starts before then. For example, Haiti will become independent in 1804, Paraguay in 1811, Argentina in 1816, Chile in 1818, and finally Colombia in 1819. Okay. But in 1821, you're going to have a massive movement in the Americas. You're going to have several nations become independent, most of them former Spanish possessions. Venezuela, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, and Ecuador will all achieve independence in 1821. Right? Now, this falls right in line with the idealistic inclinations of the United States, these ideas of liberty and freedom and self-governance, right? But it is going to cause the aftermath and the effects of the War of 1812 is really going to cause the American government to adopt the more realistic aspects of this. They're going to lean on this. You can see this really clearly in a speech given by Secretary of State John Quincy Adams on July 4th, 1821, in the aftermath of this massive independent movement in the Americas. This is often referred to as the monsters to destroy speech, right? But he says in this, he says, America should abstain from interference in the concerns of others, even when the conflict has been for principles for which she clings, as the last vital drop of blood that visits the heart, whenever the standard of freedom and independence shall be unfurled, there will be America's hearts, her benedictions, and her prayers. In other words, we're the biggest cheerleader. But he continues, but she goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. She is the well-wisher of freedom and independence of all. She is the champion and vindicator only of her own. She well knows that by once enlisting under the banners other than her own, that they were, even if they're banners of foreign independence, she would involve herself beyond the power of extrication in all the wars of interest and intrigue, of individual avarice, envy, and ambition, which assume the colors and usurp the standards of freedom. Like I said, this is on July 4th, 1821. Right? Adams is saying that we are the biggest fanboys of independence and freedom, but we are only a champion to ourselves, and we see this reflected in what becomes known as the Monroe Doctrine. In the aftermath of this 1821 independence movement, the United States had a lot of concerns about European interference in the Americas, particularly if they tried to get some of these territories back, right? This was bolstered further by an alliance that was created by Russia, Prussia, and Austria, calling itself the Holy Alliance. The Holy Alliance not only promised to support each other in case of revolution internally, and promised not to bog each other down by fighting each other in wars, but they also promised to pursue issues elsewhere, right? Including maybe perhaps lost territories in the Americas, right? Russia is going to begin exerting authority in North America as a result. They're going to begin banning ships from approaching the west coast of North America, right? They have a claim on Oregon territory, a claim that they share with the United States, Great Britain, and Spain, right? And they're beginning to exert authority on the coastal regions as a result. When the Holy Alliance suggested that an effort perhaps should be undertaken to return all those lost Spanish territories in the Americas back to Spain, it prompted Secretary of State John Quincy Adams to take an action again. This time he's going to write a speech to be delivered by the president, and this is the Monroe Doctrine. John Quincy Adams' writing, more commonly known as the Monroe Doctrine, was delivered to Congress during James Monroe's annual message to Congress on December 2nd, 1823. This is why it's called the Monroe Doctrine and not the John Quincy Adams Doctrine, right? And in it, it outlines the realistic and idealistic aspects of American policy now here in the Western Hemisphere. In it, it states, the occasion has been judged proper for asserting as a principle in which the rights and interests of the United States involved that the American continents plural, by the free and independent condition which they have assumed and maintain, are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European power. In other words, Europe, stay out of the Western Hemisphere. We should consider any attempt on their part to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety. All right, we're effectively declaring ourselves the superpower of the Western Hemisphere. In regard to our policy to Europe, it remains the same, which is not to interfere with the internal concerns of any of its powers, to consider the government de facto as the legitimate government for us, to cultivate friendly relations with it, and to preserve those relations by a frank, firm, and manly policy meeting in all instances the just claims of every power, submitting to injuries from none. Okay, so this again is saying we are going to stay out of European affairs. So what the Monroe Doctrine does is it exhibits American nationalism to the nth degree, right? And it is a combination of American realism and American idealism. The realism is pretty self-evident. The United States is going to stay out of European affairs. That is a continuation of that policy that was suggested by George Washington, right? No permanent alliances, that realistic policy, right? But there's the idealism mixed in there too, right? The United States is going to spread liberty and freedom in the Western Hemisphere, right? We are going to be the ultimate, again, fanboys of this, not champions, fanboys of this, right? We've declared ourselves a superpower. Now, the European nations don't pay a whole lot of attention to the Monroe Doctrine at the time, but this is going to be a general policy of the United States for many generations to come. Matter of fact, we'll even go through and modify it. When Theodore Roosevelt becomes president of the United States, he is going to modify the Monroe Doctrine. He is going to basically take us from being the fanboy of independence and freedom in the Western Hemisphere and turn us into the champion of independence and freedom in the Western Hemisphere. And he'll use that for justification for inventing a country, basically cutting Panama off from the rest of Colombia in order for the United States to be able to build the Panama Canal, right? Even if we move further forward, if you take a look at what we know as Bush Doctrine, the doctrine created by George W. Bush after the 9/11 attacks, honestly, if you take a look at the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, take Western Hemisphere out, replace it with the word world, and there you have Bush Doctrine. Instead of being the champions of independence and freedom in the Western Hemisphere, now we're the champions of independence and freedom in the world. There's Bush Doctrine. So you see, we still see aspects of it that affect policy even to this very day.